If you grew up in the 90s, you probably heard someone at some point randomly say, "No wheezing the juice," and immediately knew exactly what movie they were talking about. Today, we're taking a look back at Encino Man, the 1992 comedy that somehow managed to combine a frozen caveman, Southern California high school culture, and peak-era Pauly Shore into one surprisingly memorable package. Today we're starting a three-part retrospective on the career of the weasel himself, Pauly Shore. We'll be looking back at a different flick each week, and today we begin with my own introduction to Shore on the big screen, the one I was joyfully treated to one summer afternoon as part of a Cheap Seats double feature paired with Wayne's World. Today we thaw out Encino Man. The premise is delightfully ridiculous. High school outsider Dave Morgan is trying to improve his social standing and impress his longtime crush when he and his best friend Stoney accidentally discover a prehistoric caveman frozen beneath Dave's backyard. After thawing him out in the garage, which medically speaking is probably not the recommended procedure, they realize he's alive. The two teenagers introduce him to modern society and pass him off as a foreign exchange student named Link. Naturally, chaos follows. The film stars Sean Astin as Dave Morgan. By that point, Astin was already known for The Goonies, and he would later become famous to an entirely new generation as Samwise Gamgee in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Playing Link is Brendan Fraser, in one of his earliest major film roles. Fraser would go on to star in films like The Mummy, George of the Jungle, and later win an Academy Award for The Whale. Looking back now, it's fascinating to see a future Oscar winner spending most of the movie communicating through grunts, facial expressions, and pure physical comedy. Then there's Pauly Shore as Stoney Brown, arguably the human embodiment of early 90s California slang. Shore was already well known from MTV and his stand-up comedy career. During the early 90s, he became a recognizable comedy star through films such as Son-in-Law, In the Army Now, and Biodome. The supporting cast includes Megan Ward as Robin Sweeney, Dave's dream girl, Robin Tunney as Ella, and veteran actors Mariette Hartley and Richard Masur as Dave's parents. Now, if you're wondering who thought, what if we took E.T., mixed it with a teen comedy, and replaced the alien with a caveman? The answer lies with director Les Mayfield and writers George Shalhoub and Sean Sheps. Encino Man was Mayfield's feature directorial debut. The movie was produced for roughly $7 million and released by Hollywood Pictures, a division of Disney, on May 22, 1992. At the time, Pauly Shore was a rising pop culture figure thanks to MTV. The studio recognized that Shore already had a built-in audience, making him a valuable part of the marketing strategy. Production took place in late 1991 and early 1992 around the Los Angeles area, with several recognizable Southern California locations appearing throughout the film. When Encino Man hit theaters, critics weren't exactly lining up to declare it a masterpiece. Reviews were generally negative, and many critics focused on the film's broad humor and Pauly Shore's highly specific comedy style. But audiences were much kinder. The movie earned over $40 million worldwide against its modest budget, making it a financial success. And that's where the story gets interesting. Encino Man is one of those movies that demonstrates the difference between critical reception and audience affection. Plenty of films get positive reviews and disappear. Encino Man got mediocre reviews and somehow remained lodged in the brains of an entire generation. Part of that comes down to timing. The movie arrived at a very specific moment in American pop culture. The early 90s had a unique identity. The polished excess of the 80s was fading. Grunge was emerging. MTV still had enormous cultural influence. Shopping malls were social headquarters. Video rental stores were thriving. Teen comedies occupied a major place in entertainment. Encino Man unintentionally became a time capsule of that world. Watch it today, and you're not just watching a comedy, you're seeing a snapshot of suburban Southern California through a distinctly early 90s lens. The clothes, the slang, the hairstyles, the school environment, and even the way teenagers interact all feels like artifacts from another era. And speaking of slang, we gotta talk about Stoney. Pauly Shore's performance is either going to make you laugh, make you cringe, or somehow do both simultaneously. Stoney exists in a universe entirely of his own creation. He talks in phrases that sound like they were assembled from a random collection of surfer magazines, energy drinks, and pure confidence. The remarkable thing is that Shore commits completely to the character. There isn't a hint of self-consciousness in the performance. The reason the character works is that everyone else treats him seriously. Nobody walks into a scene and says, "Why are you talking like that?" They just accept Stoney as part of reality. It's one of the movie's secret strengths. The film never pauses to explain its weirdness. Then there's Brendan Fraser. Honestly, Fraser is the movie's MVP. Playing a caveman sounds easy until you realize how much of the performance relies on body language. Link has very little dialogue for much of the movie. Fraser has to communicate curiosity, fear, excitement, confusion, and eventually confidence without traditional character development tools. His athleticism is also impressive. The physical comedy works because Fraser commits fully. Whether he's climbing, running, reacting to modern technology, or navigating high school social structures that probably seem more confusing than surviving the Ice Age, he remains believable. What's especially interesting in hindsight is seeing the charisma that would later make him a major star. Even under layers of caveman behavior, the screen presence is already there. Sean Astin provides the grounding element. Dave is the relatable character. He's insecure, awkward, and desperate to improve his social status. His journey reflects a familiar teen movie theme, the belief that popularity will solve all your problems. At first, Link seems like the perfect solution. Suddenly, Dave has something nobody else has. He has a literal caveman. Unfortunately for Dave, Link quickly becomes cooler than everyone else. It's one of the film's funniest observations. The prehistoric caveman adapts to high school faster than the actual high school students. The movie repeatedly flips expectations this way. The supposed primitive character often behaves with greater honesty and emotional intelligence than the supposedly civilized characters around him. And that brings us to one of the more interesting aspects of the film. Beneath all of the goofy comedy, Encino Man is essentially a story about authenticity. Link doesn't understand social hierarchies. He doesn't care who's popular. He doesn't understand why people pretend to be something they're not. Because of that, he accidentally exposes the absurdity of high school social structures. Now, let's be clear, this is not a hidden philosophical masterpiece. Nobody's going to compare Encino Man to great works of existential cinema, but the film does contain a surprisingly consistent theme about being yourself. Dave wants popularity, Stoney wants acceptance, Robin wants authenticity, Link simply exists as himself, and somehow the caveman ends up being the most emotionally healthy person in the movie. And that's a funny observation when you think about it. The guy who was frozen for thousands of years adapts better than everyone else. Another reason the film has endured is that it captures a style of comedy that feels increasingly rare. The movie isn't cynical. Nobody's trying to deconstruct the genre. Nobody's making meta-commentary about being in a movie. The film presents a ridiculous premise and asks the audience to enjoy the ride. There's something refreshing about that. Modern comedies often operate with a layer of irony. Encino Man has almost none. It embraces its silliness completely. That sincerity helps explain why many people who grew up with the movie still revisit it decades later. And speaking of revisiting it, one thing that stands out today is the cast's future success. Watching the movie now feels a little surreal. You have Sean Astin before Lord of the Rings. You have Brendan Fraser before The Mummy and his eventual Academy Award win. You have Robin Tunney before The Craft and The Mentalist. You even have a small appearance from Astin's castmate on The Goonies, Ke Quan, who would later experience one of Hollywood's most remarkable career comebacks and win an Academy Award decades after appearing in the film. In retrospect, the cast ended up being far more accomplished than anyone could have predicted, from a movie about a caveman attending high school. The film also generated an unusual mini-franchise. A television sequel called Encino Woman arrived in 1996. Meanwhile, Brendan Fraser made a cameo appearance as Link in both Son-in-Law and In the Army Now, creating a loose comedic universe connected to several Pauly Shore movies. That's right, long before cinematic universes became standard practice, there was apparently the Encino Man extended universe.
Shush!
The movie's reputation has steadily improved over time. While critics were unimpressed in 1992, many viewers now regard it as a cult classic. Discussions among fans frequently highlight the movie's rewatchability, quotable dialogue, and nostalgic appeal. And nostalgia is a huge factor here. Encino Man represents a specific kind of movie that studios don't make very often anymore. It's a mid-budget comedy with a bizarre premise, a young cast, and no expectation of becoming a major franchise starter. It's simply aimed to entertain audiences for 90 minutes. Ironically, that modest ambition may be part of its enduring charm. The movie doesn't feel engineered, it feels discovered. Like somebody pitched the idea in a meeting, everyone laughed, and then somehow the project actually got approved. And thank goodness it did, because even if Encino Man isn't one of the greatest comedies ever made, it remains one of the most distinctly 90s comedies ever made. It's goofy, it's weird, it's endlessly quotable, it has a caveman who becomes the coolest kid in school, and somehow, against all odds, it still works. More than 3 decades after its release, the movie remains a nostalgic comfort watch for many fans. It serves as a reminder of a different era of comedy, a different era in Hollywood, and a different era of growing up. So, if you haven't watched Encino Man in a while, it might be worth revisiting. Beyond the jokes and the absurd premise, it's a fascinating snapshot of a very specific moment in pop culture. It's the kind of movie that could only have come from the early 90s, and that's a big part of why it remains so memorable. Whether you first saw it in a theater, on cable, or from a well-worn VHS tape, Encino Man continues to hold a special place in the hearts of a lot of movie fans. Not because it's perfect, but because it's fun, sincere, and completely comfortable being exactly what it is. Next week, we'll continue our look back at Shore's career with a trip to the farm, so put on your shit kickers, and we'll see you then. So when was the last time you watched Encino Man? Did it hold up for you? Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you feel like dropping a like or subscribe, that's much appreciated.